Imagine for a moment, more than 3,000 years ago on the banks of the Nile River, as the winter sun began its slow journey back to the heavens, thousands of people gathered in the great temples of Egypt. They knew nothing about sleighs, reindeer, or decorated trees. There were no wrapped gifts or Christmas carols. And yet, something surprisingly familiar was happening, a celebration of light, rebirth, and hope that would echo through the millennia to our present day. This is one of those fascinating moments when archaeology reveals to us that, despite all the differences between ancient and modern civilizations, some human needs remain eternally the same. The need to celebrate, the need to find light in darkness, the need to believe that even in the darkest days of winter, there is hope for renewal. When we think of Christmas, very specific images immediately come to mind. Illuminated trees, nativity scenes, the story of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. It's a celebration deeply rooted in Christian tradition, officially celebrated for about 2,000 years. But archaeologists who dedicate their lives to unearthing the secrets of ancient Egypt have discovered something extraordinary. Millennia before any Christmas celebration, the Egyptians were already holding festivals that shared surprisingly similar themes. We're not talking here about a direct connection or proven historical influence. Christian Christmas didn't come from ancient Egypt. But what makes this discovery so fascinating is realizing that cultures completely separated by time and space developed similar celebrations, responding to the same natural cycles and the same existential questions that have always tormented humanity. To understand these Egyptian celebrations, we need to mentally transport ourselves to a world very different from ours, a world without electricity, where the darkness of night was absolute and often terrifying. A world where seasonal changes weren't mere climatic inconveniences, but literal matters of life or death for entire civilizations that depended on agriculture. The winter solstice, that day in December when we have the longest night and shortest day of the year, was observed with obsessive attention by the ancient Egyptians. Their priest-astronomers, perhaps the first scientists in history, mapped the heavens with a precision that still surprises us today. They knew exactly when the sun would reach its lowest point on the horizon and, crucially, when it would begin its journey back. Think about the anxiety this could generate. Each day that passed after the autumn equinox, the sun became weaker, more distant, more elusive. The nights lengthened, the cold increased. What if one year the sun simply decided not to return? What if the darkness continued deepening indefinitely? It's difficult for us, with our modern astronomical knowledge and precise calendars, to truly comprehend this primordial fear. But for the ancient Egyptians, the moment when the sun began to return, when the days started growing again, was cause for deep and sincere celebration. It wasn't just an astronomical change, it was a renewed promise that life would continue, that the fields would flourish again, that the cosmic order remained intact. If you're enjoying this fascinating journey through ancient Egypt, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos about mysteries and archaeological discoveries that connect the past to the present. Egyptian temples were built with specific astronomical alignments that illuminated in special ways during the winter solstice. The Temple of Karnak, one of the most impressive religious complexes ever built by humanity, has chambers and corridors that were deliberately designed to capture the first rays of the sun after the solstice. Imagine the scene. Amid the darkness of a massive temple, suddenly, a single beam of golden light penetrates through carefully calculated openings, illuminating the statue of a deity or a sacred altar. It was theater, yes, but it was also a tangible demonstration of divine power and the promise of renewal. The people who witnessed these moments weren't just observing an astronomical phenomenon. They were participating in a miracle, a visual confirmation that their prayers had been heard and that the cycle of life would continue. But the most intriguing connection between ancient Egyptian celebrations and our modern Christmas themes comes from one of the most powerful and enduring mythological narratives in human history, the story of Osiris. Osiris was in many ways the central figure of Egyptian theology. His myth contained all the elements of a great drama: betrayal, death, love, magic, and, crucially, resurrection. The story, told and retold over millennia on temple walls and sacred papyri, narrates how Osiris, A benevolent king who brought civilization and agriculture to Egypt was betrayed by his brother Set, who murdered him and dismembered his body, scattering the pieces throughout Egypt. But love knows no limits. Osiris's devoted wife undertook a tireless search for the fragments of her beloved's body. With the help of her sister Nephthys and using powerful magic, she managed to reunite the pieces and, through enchantments, restore life to Osiris, not as a mortal being but as the lord and judge of the underworld, the eternal ruler of the realm of the dead. The story doesn't end there. Isis, through her magic and determination, managed to conceive a son with the resurrected Osiris, Horus, who would grow up to avenge his father and bring order and justice back to Egypt. Why is this story relevant to our discussion about celebrations similar to Christmas? Because the cycle of Osiris, death, rebirth, and the promise of eternal life was intrinsically linked to the agricultural and natural cycles that the Egyptians observed annually. There were specific rituals called mysteries of Osiris that were performed in various temples throughout Egypt. In these rituals, which included elaborate processions, dramatizations, and offerings, the priests and people symbolically reenacted the death and resurrection of Osiris. Seeds were planted in Osiris-shaped molds, symbolizing how the dead god was buried in the earth, and when these seeds germinated, they represented his rebirth. Some scholars have noted a fascinating parallel. Certain versions of these rituals included a 40-day preparation period before the ritual death of Osiris, followed by celebrations of his rebirth. Although there is no direct historical connection, it's impossible not to notice the conceptual similarity with the Christian Advent, a period of spiritual preparation preceding the celebration of Christ's birth. What makes this so moving is realizing that, thousands of years before Christianity, people were already seeking comfort and meaning in stories of death and resurrection, of sacrifice and redemption. They already understood that hope for renewal, whether of the earth, life, or the human spirit, was fundamental to human existence. But perhaps the most direct and surprising connection between Egyptian practices and our modern celebrations comes from a peculiarity of the Egyptian calendar that fascinates historians and archaeologists to this day. The Egyptian civil calendar had a mathematical problem. It consisted of 12 months of 30 days each, totaling only 360 days. But of course, the actual solar year has approximately 365 days. What to do with these 5 extra days? The Egyptian solution was brilliantly creative. They added 5 special days at the end of the year, days that existed outside the normal structure of the calendar. And here's the truly fascinating part. These 5 days were dedicated exclusively to celebrating the births of 5 principal deities: Osiris, Horus, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Imagine the atmosphere during these 5 days. Normal work ceased. People gathered for festivals. There were offerings at the temples, songs, public celebrations. Each day was dedicated to the birth of a specific god, and each birth was celebrated as a cosmic event of fundamental importance. Think about the conceptual similarity. Special days, outside the normal routine, dedicated to celebrating divine births that brought blessings and hope to the world. Were there gift exchanges? Probably ritual offerings. Were there family gatherings? Certainly, as Egyptian religious festivals were also important social occasions. Was there a sense of renewal and new beginnings? Absolutely, as these days marked the transition to a new year. These archaeological discoveries reveal surprising connections between ancient and modern cultures. If you want to continue exploring these fascinating mysteries, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell to receive alerts for our next videos. What is particularly notable is how these celebrations fulfilled social and psychological functions similar to those that Christmas fulfills in our society. They marked a moment of pause in the annual cycle of work. They brought communities together. They offered an opportunity for reflection on the divine and the deeper meaning of existence. They brought light, literally and metaphorically, to the darkest days of the year. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, what do these archaeological discoveries really tell us? They don't suggest that Christmas stole its ideas from ancient Egypt, nor that there's a direct line of influence between these practices separated by millennia. What they reveal is something much deeper and in a way more moving about the human condition. There are certain themes, certain needs, certain yearnings that seem to be universal in human experience, transcending cultures, eras, and geographies. The need to find meaning in natural cycles, the desire to believe that death is not the end, that rebirth is possible, the hope that light will always return however long the darkness may be. The ancient Egyptians, living on the banks of a river in an unforgiving desert, created their own answers to these universal questions. They looked to the sky and saw in the sun's return a divine promise. They looked at their fields and saw in the cycle of planting and harvesting a metaphor for death and resurrection. They created powerful myths about gods who died and were reborn, reflecting their own hopes for afterlife and eternal renewal. Thousands of years later, in a region not too distant geographically, but vastly different culturally, another religious tradition would arise with surprisingly similar themes. Christianity, with its story of a God who becomes human, dies and is resurrected, offering hope for eternal life, resonated with something deep in the human psyche, something that perhaps was already being expressed on the banks of the Nile thousands of years before. And when Christianity decided to celebrate the birth of Christ, it chose a date near the winter solstice, not because Jesus was necessarily born at that time, biblical scholars generally agree he probably wasn't, but because it was a time of year already loaded with spiritual significance for so many cultures. It was the moment when light began to return. It was the moment when renewal became possible again. It was the perfect moment to celebrate the birth of someone described as the light of the world. What archaeologists discovered by studying the ritual practices of ancient Egypt doesn't diminish the importance or meaning of Christian Christmas. On the contrary, it places this celebration in a broader and richer context of human experience. It shows that when we gather in December to celebrate, we're participating in a tradition much older and deeper than any specific religion, a tradition of finding light in darkness, hope in despair, and renewal in the darkest moments of the year. There is something deeply moving about imagining an Egyptian priest, 3,000 years ago, preparing offerings to celebrate the birth of Osiris, unaware that thousands of years later, people around the world would still be gathering at the same time of year, celebrating similar themes of divine birth, light, and renewal. He couldn't have imagined Christmas trees or Christmas carols, but he would certainly understand the fundamental human impulse that motivates these celebrations. The sands of Egypt continue to reveal their secrets. Each archaeological excavation, each deciphered papyrus, each studied temple adds more details to our understanding of how these ancient peoples lived, thought, and celebrated. And the more we learn about them, the more we realize that, despite all the superficial differences of culture, technology, and belief, we share something essential with them. We share the same need to find meaning in the cosmos, the same tendency to look at the stars and see not just burning balls of gas, but signs, symbols, and promises. The same desire to gather with those we love during the most challenging moments of the year and find, in community and shared celebration, strength to continue. When you decorate your Christmas tree next year in 2026, or gather with your family to celebrate, or light candles in the darkness of December, you'll be, in a way, participating in a tradition that goes back not just 2,000 years, but potentially 5,000 or more. You'll be doing what the ancient Egyptians did when they gathered in their temples to celebrate the sun's return and the birth of their gods. You'll be affirming against darkness and cold that life continues, that hope remains, that light always returns. If these fascinating connections between past and present have sparked your curiosity, join our community by subscribing to the channel. Every week we explore new archaeological mysteries and discoveries that change our understanding of human history. Don't miss it. Archaeological discoveries in Egypt don't answer all our questions about the origins of our modern traditions, but they do something equally valuable. They remind us of our deep and ancient connection with all the human beings who came before us, seeking the same essential things we still seek today: meaning, community, hope, and light amid darkness. And perhaps that's the true magic of these winter celebrations. Whether ancient Egyptian or modern Christmas celebrations, they connect us not only to each other in the present, but to an unbroken chain of humanity stretching through the millennia, all of us celebrating, each in our own way, the eternal mystery of renewal and the persistent triumph of hope over despair.